If you're shopping for a home and you find a home that you love, but it's a for sale by owner, I'm going to give you 3 things that you should consider before making an offer coming up next. What's happening, friends? This week, we're going to talk about if you are a buyer and you want to purchase a home that is for sale by owner. So FSBO is what we call it for short, right? And so what is a FSBO? It's basically a owner who puts their house on the market and they're unrepresented. They don't have a broker that is helping them market or represent them in the sale of the house. And in today's world with the internet, it used to be more difficult, but in today's world, it's a little bit easier because you have the internet where you can put it on Zillow and all of the different internet sites out there yourself, and you can then market the property to the internet that way. It's not marketed as well as if you do it with a brokerage, but you can get it out there and people will see it. The other option is there are flat fee brokerages out there that will, for $500 or $1,000, take the pictures that you took and the description that you wrote, and then they'll put it on the MLS, which then will feed all of the real estate sites, and then we will see it on the MLS. But it tells us that we just have to deal directly with the seller. The brokerage doesn't represent the seller. So that's kind of how FSBOs work and how they're marketed. But as a buyer, if you run into a FSBO and you want to buy it because it seems like the right house and you like everything about it, there's 3 things that I want you to consider before you do that. And it's really about expectation management, right? This is not to deter you from doing it, but it's really so you understand going into the process what to expect and things to be worried about, because it's not going to be as smooth or normal of a sale as if there were 2 brokerages involved representing both sides. It's going to be a very different process. And so the first thing that you want to consider is that seller will not have an expert helping them with due diligence, right? When we take a listing, we do a lot of due diligence prior to putting that house on the market to ensure that once we get it under contract, we have a smooth sale. So we do things like review the title report, make sure there's no issues in a title report. We review the wastewater records to make sure that those are up to date and approved. We review potentially a home inspection, a pre-home inspection, to let you know if there's any deferred maintenance that we should take care of that'll be a red flag for a buyer. We're going to look at the permits and make sure all your permits are good and your solar system permit was closed, and so that doesn't become a red flag during the purchase process. We're going to help you through the disclosures and make sure that you fill out the disclosures properly and answer your questions so you don't expose yourself to any liability if you don't disclose something or misunderstand something or misanswer one of those questions. None of these things are going to be done if it's a for sale by owner, because they don't have somebody who has done this hundreds of times helping them through the process and making sure. So once you get into escrow, you could end up running into problems that shouldn't normally occur because it's going to be a surprise. You're going to find out that the downstairs, which was a nice finished basement and a mother's-in-law quarters, was never permitted, and that's going to affect the appraisal. Things like that were not disclosed up front could come up during a escrow, during a transaction, which could not necessarily kill the deal, but it's going to cause bumps in the road and you're going to have to deal with them at that time. So that's the first thing, is not having an expert helping them with due diligence and preparation of the property for the market. The second thing is that they don't have an expert advising them on the contract. And this is important. I mean, everybody thinks they're an attorney and they can figure out a contract, but people's understanding of a contract is very different. 2 people's understanding of a contract could be very different. And if it's the first time you're looking at it, you can make assumptions and conclusions based on the contract that may not be what the law says or court cases have determined, and you could have conflict based on that because you don't have somebody saying, no, this is what that means and this is how the courts have interpreted it, and so you have a clear understanding of what the contractual terms are. A for sale by owner is not necessarily going to adhere to the contract timelines. They might not even know exactly what the timelines are. There are tons of timelines in the contract that are very specific. You have so many days to provide a seller's disclosure, so many days to acknowledge receipt, so many days to review it, so many days to bring up items that were not disclosed. There's very specific timelines, and if you don't have an expert that's following that, a professional that's following that and helping them through that, they may miss things which can cause issues during the transaction. They may not know what they have to provide, right? A contract will require, a lot of times, a for sale by owner is just going to look at the closing timeline and the financing. How much money are they going to make? They're not going to look at, we're asking you for a full record of the HOA documents. We're going to ask you for a termite inspection. We're going to ask you for a survey or staking. Those are the types of things that the seller's side has to provide, and they're responsible for ordering and producing. And if those things are required in the contract and the seller doesn't have someone working with them to get those things ordered and produced and delivered, that may cause issues throughout the contract. So you want to, be sure, you have to make sure that they're actually doing those things if they're in the contract. And then maybe last but not least on this point is they're not bound by a code of ethics, right? So we are, as realtors, bound by a code of ethics. If there is something that we know that affects the value of the property, we have to let you know. Even if the seller objects, we have to let the other side know, because it's the ethical thing to do, and a for sale by owner isn't. So they don't have to tell you that there was a previous leak in the roof or maybe a previous fire in one of the bedrooms and stuff like that, because they're just not bound by it. They're supposed to legally, but again, they're not going to do that due diligence potentially, and they may be trying to cover something up, and you never know. I'm not saying everybody does this, but those are the kinds of things that could come up during that process. So that's the second point, is that you don't have an expert advising them on the contract and what their obligations are. And then the last thing, point number 3, is sellers a lot of times as a for sale by owner have unreasonable expectations. That's the reason they're a for sale by owner in the first place, is they want too much money, right? They may have asked a couple of realtors for a price and advice on a price, and they didn't like it, so they just decided to sell the house by themselves at the price that they determined. And they may also have unreasonable expectations on terms, right? They may want terms that are not normal, not standard, and that could make the negotiating process difficult, because something that is very standard to us may not be standard to them, and they may be asking for something that either is unreasonable or actually not possible based on the normal escrow process, closing timelines, things like that. So you just have to go into the negotiation understanding that, and knowing that you may have to work a little bit harder to get through all of those things, because a seller may not have that same level of understanding of what the contract requires and what the expectations are, and what is normal, what is standard, and what is not. So those are your kind of 3 things to understand when you are getting into a negotiation or you're looking at purchasing a for sale by owner. But in conclusion, at the end of the day, you can definitely do it. You shouldn't avoid it if it's the right house and it's the perfect property. You don't want the fact that it's a for sale by owner to stop you from getting that house, right? You got to keep the end in mind, the big picture in mind. You just want to make sure that you're going into it with the right expectations, and most importantly, you have a good agent who's going to help you double check all of this stuff, because they're really going to do double duty, right? They're going to do the things that the seller's agent should have done, and they're going to be representing you to make sure that all of these things that I just talked about are checked, are ordered, are delivered, all the due diligence is done. There's a lot that has to happen throughout that process. So you want to make sure you're not using your cousin's friend who just got into the business. You're using somebody who has been through this a few times and understands what to look for and what the red flags are. So if you have any questions, you can put them in the comments below, or email me at dylan@buybigisland.com, and we'll get right back to you. I'll see you guys next week. Thanks for watching. Aloha.